global perspective, the poor in the U.S. are better off than those in other countries. In some countries, up to 65% of the people are in poverty. So when we hear that approximately 13% of the U.S. population lives in poverty, it may seem low in comparison. However, in the land of the free, and a country in which all men are created equal, the unequal distribution of resources, power, prestige, and wealth is a social problem. And the poor are not just off in the distance. The poor live right in our backyards. Note that 14.1% of Orange County residents are considered poor. Not only is it social inequality that some individuals in our country have and others have not, but poverty has a snowball effect on individuals as the lack of resources creates other social problems for these individuals, which in turn does affect all of us in the long run. Poverty and wealth are not a result of individual choices, but are largely beyond a person's control. In other words, when you are born into any social class, rich, poor, or in between, the structure of our society does its best to keep you there. Of course, there are the rare cases when someone goes from rags to riches, but these are not the norm. When we say that there is structural inequality, it means that our society is set up for some people to fail and others to succeed, regardless of their merits or efforts as individuals. There are three kinds of poverty discussed in the book. The first is absolute or biological poverty. This is when people actually suffer the consequences of malnutrition or exposure due to their homelessness or lack of food. Relative poverty refers to being poorer than your peers in your society. Official poverty is simply the line set by the government under which you would receive government benefits if your income falls below a certain level. In the United States, the poverty line, the family income level in order to be able to eligible for government assistance, is based on a low-cost food budget and changes each year. The poverty cutoff affects policy decisions and program eligibility. Note that in some instances, a lowering of the official poverty line, and in turn a decrease in the number of people eligible for government assistance, has caused the appearance that there are actually less individuals in poverty in our country. Our government has done a massive overhaul to our welfare system since 1996, yet from a sociological perspective, the result has been that more people in need are now not being served. You can read the article From Welfare to Work in the additional materials for more information on this topic. These are the poverty guidelines for calculating the official poverty line in the United States in 2009. Note that a full-time minimum wage job in California pays $16,000 a year before taxes, or about $14,400 after taxes. Overall, about 13% of Americans fall below the poverty line, but poverty is not distributed equally across the country. As you can see, poverty in the U.S. is concentrated in the South. If you were to lump all of the poor together and take a look at them, you would find that there are more poor whites than any other racial group. About 41% of poor people are white. This is about double the number of blacks and Latinos, who each constitute a little over 20%. However, blacks and Latinos are twice as likely as whites to be poor. This is simply an effect of the number of whites in the population and then their proportion within the poor population. The U.S. child poverty rate is the highest in the industrialized world. The poverty rate of children in the United States is about 30% higher than adults. This is due primarily to the fact that more births to single mothers occur among women with less education and therefore less earning potential. Among high school dropouts, more than half of births are to single moms, whereas among those with bachelor's degrees, there are only about 10% of births to single moms. The feminization of poverty refers to the fact that more than 50% of the poor are women. Families headed by a single mother are most likely to be poor. This is due to the high divorce rate among the poor, the high unwed birth rate, and the simple fact that women earn less in our society. So how do we avoid being in poverty? Our Henslin text notes that studies have shown that if you finish high school, marry before you have a child, marry after the age of 20, it is very unlikely that you will ever be in poverty. It is also noted that for you to develop a financially secure life, you should go to college, stay married, avoid alcoholism and drug addiction, and avoid credit card debt. Symbolic interactionists look at the meaning of poverty and the views of the poor and how they have changed as social conditions have changed. Sociologists have found that in times of economic prosperity, people tend to have a harsher view of the poor and attribute their problems to personal failings such as drug abuse or alcoholism or just lack of motivation. However, in times of economic hardship, such as during the Great Depression, during recessions, and during our current time, people tend to be more sympathetic toward the poor and attribute their poverty to structural problems like a lack of jobs. According to functionalists, inequality is necessary in order to make high-level positions desirable. Those of you who have taken Intro to Sociology might remember the Davis-Moore thesis. This states that we must pay those positions that require additional education or skills a higher wage in order to motivate people to go through the extra training and time that it takes to become doctors, lawyers, engineers, and highly skilled professionals like that. Functionalists also point out that we need the poor because poverty helps society. In the book, they cover 12 functions. It is strange to think of something as negative as poverty being functional, but in some ways it is. Not for those actually living in poverty, of course, but for the society at large. Some of these functions include the fact that poverty creates jobs. If you think about all of the social workers who are employed because they are helping the poor, you will see that that's a segment of our population that benefits. Also, the poor make the economy more efficient by purchasing things that would otherwise be wasted, such as secondhand clothing, day-old bread, all of these sort of substandard products that most people don't buy, but the poor will. The poor also help society by being soldiers for war on the front lines. In Germany, the poor were actually called cannon fodder. Even though soldiers do get paid substantially more for being on active duty and in dangerous situations, if you think about the children of millionaires and politicians and successful businessmen, there pretty much isn't a dollar amount that would motivate them to be on the front lines of war. Whereas if you are from a poorer family, those extra wages, that's actually something that might cause you to join the military and to put yourself in that dangerous situation. The poor are also sources of entertainment for us. About, 8 years ago, there was this whole scandal with bum fights. I don't know if you were aware of it, but some kids paid poor people or homeless men specifically to fight each other in the streets and then videoed it and sold those videos. This is kind of the most blatant example of poor people being used for entertainment. But if you look back to the origins of certain music styles such as the blues, hip-hop, even country music, a lot of this has come out of communities that are living in poverty. According to conflict theory, the problems of the poor are due to their deprived position in a system of stratification. The wealthy pass on advantages to their children, and the poor pass on disadvantages to theirs. False consciousness and the Horatio Alger myth are used to manipulate the poor. Horatio Alger was a popular author during the Depression era. He wrote rags to riches stories about young boys pulling themselves up by their bootstraps and becoming successful in the midst of widespread economic hardship. This is one example of how our media has reinforced the idea that each of us has the potential to become wealthy one day, if we are diligent, motivated, and all-around good people. This causes many lower-class individuals to act or vote against their own best interests and in favor of the rich because they are convinced that at some point they too will be rich. Even though as sociologists we know that this is very unlikely. According to conflict theory, the poor are poor and the rich are rich, not because of individual problems, but because society is structured in a way that intentionally keeps the wealthy few on top and the impoverished masses on the bottom. The social class that a person is born into has far-reaching and long-lasting effects on their life, from their health to their education, to their occupation, and even to how long they will live. If they didn't have a use for them, cold-hearted capitalists would probably be content to let the poor die off from starvation and exposure. However, the poor are useful to capitalists because they are a source of cheap labor. According to Marxists, the only reason that the elite allow welfare programs to exist is to keep this pool of low-cost workers alive until they are needed by employers. By forcing them to register, meet certain criteria, and periodically check in order to receive government benefits, the elite are able to keep tabs on the lower class. One social class has many long-lasting effects on one's life. In terms of physical health, studies have shown that there is a social gradient of health. In other words, the more money you make, the healthier you are and the longer you will live. Richer people have greater access to quality care, and their lifestyle also allows them to be healthier and free from many of the stresses that poor people face. When you are poor, you have less coping resources, and also a locus of control that is external of oneself. In other words, things seem to be happening to you versus you being able to affect changes in your own life. In terms of family life, poor people are more likely to get divorced and have different styles of child rearing. Education also differs between the poor and wealthy classes. Not only is there a varying quality of public schools based on neighborhood, but there is also a perceived value of education that is different. Among the rich, education is seen as something that is essential to success in life, whereas among the poor, once you've completed your compulsory education, the important thing is that you get out there and start earning a living to support your family. And college is seen as more of a luxury than a necessity. When it comes to crime and criminal justice, in the previous lecture we discussed how enforcement and attention was focused differently on white-collar crime versus street crime. There's also a difference in the locality of victims. The perpetrators of street crimes typically live in close proximity to the people they victimize, so poor people are hurt by crime more than wealthy people. These are just a few examples of the many ways that social class has an effect on a person's life.